Hi.
Hello again. On our discussion of 1 Corinthians 15, we've spent quite a bit of time over the last 3 weeks just discussing why Paul gives his longest chapter to one subject, resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
That's how important he views it as being in terms of the hope. Not only the hope we have, but the gospel we preach. It all hinges on how you view the resurrection. And he's made the point, if you don't believe that Jesus has been raised from the dead, your faith is vain, your preaching is vain. And of course the Watchtower redefines the word resurrection out of all, so that it can't even be recognized by a Christian. They've made it into a substitution of a spirit existence for the rulers, who are not going to be seen anymore. Christ and God are not going to be seen. The rulers aren't going to be seen. They've turned the concept into a mediatorial kingdom, a 1,000-year period where your faith is actually mediated by people like you.
The word resurrection, if you look it up in your interlinear, is raised up, stand up. You know, something is there. And it's not, some kind of float up or, just a spark of life has gone back to God.
No, the Watchtower...
It's talking about something actually standing up.
The concept the Watchtower has chosen instead of it is more like the Gnostic or Marcionite concept, that you have to lose your body to be part of this privileged group that will have rulership over the earth. But that's not what Paul's talking about here. He's talking about the gift of immortality, as we'll see in the rest of the chapter. It's the body that's going to become immortal. You're not going to take on a new existence like the angel's existence that's immortal. It's a bodily immortality. So
from a corruption to an incorruptible body.
Yeah, that's in the rest of the chapter, so we'll definitely be dealing with that in coming weeks. But in the middle of the chapter, he stresses the concept of the mediatorial kingdom. And this is the only time Paul actually deals with this concept, so we should definitely look very closely at how he describes it. And in the process, you answer a question about one of our pet proof texts when we were witnesses, which is bad associations spoil useful habits, which is embedded in the middle of this chapter. But you don't realize that the very people he's talking about who are bad associates are those who have, one, the wrong view of the resurrection, and those who, in effect, because of the spiritual stupor that they're now suffering from, in effect are not doing the right thing as Christians. So their view of the resurrection and the lack of importance of the human body has consequences in the way they live. They view what they do with the body as being meaningless because it's not part of their ultimate hope. So it plays out in Gnosticism as antinomianism, that is, doesn't matter what we do with our body, or in asceticism in the other direction, which is, well, then we should basically starve our body because the things that we do with our body have nothing to do with our spirit. The idea that ultimately grows into monasticism, where there's a superior form of spirituality that involves denial of the bodily pleasures and the bodily needs. So we wanted to read from verses 20 to 34 here to see what is a bad associate according to Paul.
And I'm reading from the New World Translation, the Silver Sword. But now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep in death. For since death came through a man, resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. For just as in Adam all are dying, so also in the Christ all will be made alive. But each one in his own proper order. Christ, the first fruits, afterwards those who belong to the Christ during his presence. Next the end, when he hands over the kingdom to his God and Father, when he has brought to nothing all government and all authority and power. For he must rule as king until God has put all enemies under his feet. And the last enemy, death, is to be brought to nothing. For God subjected all things under his feet. But when he says that all things have been subjected, it is evident that this does not include the one who subjected all things to him. But when all things have been subjected to him, then the Son himself will also subject himself to the one who subjected all things to him, that God may be all things to everyone. Otherwise, what will they do who are being baptized for the purpose of being dead ones? If the dead are not to be raised up at all, why are they also being baptized for the purpose of being such? Why are we also in danger every hour? Daily I face death. This is as sure as my exaltation over you, brothers, which I have in Christ Jesus our Lord. If like other men I have fought with wild beasts at Ephesus, of what good is it to me? If the dead are not to be raised up, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we are to die. Do not be misled. Bad associations spoil useful habits. Come to your senses in a righteous way, and do not practice sin, for some have no knowledge of God. I am speaking to move you to shame.
Notice how he connects bad associations with good or bad morals here. Bad company ruins good morals. Well, he's saying your point of view on the resurrection affects the way you live.
Yeah.
And in the context, then you can say that this stupor that the Corinthians found themselves in, spiritually speaking, was due to the fact that they had a false concept of what man was for. They thought, as Greeks thought before there were Gnostics and Marcionites, there were Platonic thinkers or Greek thinkers in general, the philosophers, who denied that the body was created by the good creator. So the idea of a body, a bodily existence, that was the enemy. That thought was what they were rejecting, that somehow the body and all the physical creation were connected with what they called the demiurge, who was a false god ultimately. So that thought is at the back of their minds, and their reasoning about immortality, for them, escaping the body, the immortality of the soul, as we used to think of it as witnesses. That was the goal, to get out of the body. So it didn't really matter what you did with your body, and you can imagine the negative consequences of that for morality.
Yeah.
And then what does a witness see here, though? He doesn't see any of this stuff about the resurrection. What he'll focus on is the subjection of the Son to the Father.
That's right. There's two things you'll see as a witness here. You'll see that the Son subjecting himself to the Father, and think this is blowing the world of a Christian out the window, which it isn't. But I mean, that's the concept. They're thinking this is going to alarm you. And the other thing is the bad associations, which you've dealt with. Those are the two verses, or the two parts of the verse that you know as a Jehovah's Witness. But I would say something that I did not understand about what Christians believed was the second coming being Christ coming in his body, humanly, to begin the rule on earth that will bring in righteousness.
Right.
So that I didn't know. And I didn't know that was the expectation of Jewish people. They were waiting for, now they didn't understand who Christ was, but they were waiting for a person, Christ, an anointed, appointed by God,
Son of David,
to rule on an earthly kingdom and bring in righteousness. That was their hope. So if you know that, then when you start to understand that the Son of God comes incarnate, comes to the earth in order to do that, to rule from the earth, that makes it the whole difference to it makes a lot of it makes more sense to you now.
Yeah, this stages idea from verse 20 to verse 26 or so. Stages of first fruits, that's Christ, raised from the dead, not recreated as a spirit. And then those who are his when he comes again, literally comes again as Messiah, Christ, to the earth. And then at the end, he says, death will be done away with. There's some kind of gap between that second coming and the end when death itself will be done away with. And notice this is one of the very few times he actually uses the word kingdom. Paul doesn't use the word kingdom very often, but here it is in verse 24. Then comes the end when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father after destroying every rule and every authority and power. Well, that's the missing element if you're a Jehovah's Witness. You don't realize that the original teaching of the church was the original teaching of the prophets. It was what Jews believed at that time.
What they hoped for.
That there would be a mediatorial kingdom, meaning that Messiah would come, he would rule until all the enemies of God were taken care of. They didn't necessarily link that with 1,000 years. Some of them did, thought it was a 1,000-year period altogether. Some thought it was a 400-year period, but it was a long period of time when Messiah would have to rule so that all the enemies of God could be put down, including death.
The bringing in of a righteous kingdom.
Now, it is true that most Jews did not think that the mediator, the king himself, who would be physically present, would be God, although some of them did. So, for instance, read Ezekiel, and you could certainly get the impression that the presence that is there in the restored world is God Yahweh himself. But other prophets lay more emphasis upon the Son of David concept, that he's going to be a descendant of David. And the truth is, Christians believe it's both, don't they? They believe he's God incarnate, but they also believe he's literally the Son of David and will be in the future too. At least most Christians did. Some don't nowadays. So the mediatorial kingdom concept was totally missing from my view. So I used to use this the way Jehovah's Witnesses use it, to prove there's some essential difference between the status of the Father and the Son.
So I think if you're processing this information, find out what you don't know before you just accept the scenario that the Watchtower gives you. Find out aspects of what was believed by the early church, what was believed by the apostles, what was believed by the Jewish people that they were ministering to, what they were hoping for. I didn't know any of those things. It makes a big difference.
Yeah. So to summarize again, the big difference as far as Jews were concerned was God is going to be personally present, whether it's in the person of a literal Messiah who you'll be able to relate to because he's there, not an invisible presence, or God himself being present. And Christians, of course, have adopted the idea that he's both God and man. The incarnation, therefore, is permanent as far as Christians are concerned. Not that every Christian knows that. Some of us have adopted a more Greek point of view that somehow we have to escape the body and go to heaven to be with God, right?
But they probably don't know
what the Jewish hope?
The Jewish hope was.
No.
Yeah. That's missing from the picture, and it makes a big difference. Yeah.
So again, what's the bad association idea here? It's denial of the physical resurrection of Christ.
Yeah.
And all the implications of that, because you realize the witnesses don't believe that the 144,000 have a physical body anymore, because they don't believe Jesus has a physical body, and they don't really believe in a resurrection of the billions of the dead either, because they are being recreated from God's memory. That's not resurrection.
Yeah.
So it has enormous implications, as it did back then, for the way you live, your morality in this life. So what's our link?
Is Christ's parousia the end? No, Paul teaches, and I can never say the word,
the mediatorial kingdom?
Yeah.
We know the word mediator, but we don't think of mediatorial kingdom.
Yeah.
Now that is based on Merrill Tenney, is it not?
Yes, it is.
One of 7 or so videos on the subject, where Merrill Tenney actually deals with these verses and gives the original interpretation of these verses before Christians lost their Jewish roots. See you next time.
Bye.